Ladies and gentlemen, I just had the pleasure of sitting down with the co-founder for the Coalition of Cancelled Priests, Father John Lovell. We talked about a host of things, including a conference coming up this summer in the Chicago area. It is the weekend of June 23rd, 24th. I'll be speaking at it, but don't hold that against the conference. I promise it'll be good otherwise. You can find tickets for that information in the links to this video, in the description to this video where the links are, excuse me. And we talked about the recent Freemasonic Anglican service at the Vatican. There's going to be an Orthodox Mass being said in the Pope's Cathedral within a couple weeks, it seems. My new book on the SSPX, Cardinal Supich, the Adoration fiasco in Chicago, the glorious history of Catholicism in Chicago, and kind of how did we get where we are today, and why do these men become priests if they hate the Catholic faith? We talked about that and more. So you're going to love this video. Enjoy. Go to thekennedyreport.com and visit the TKR store to see our new products. Kennedy's Choice Beard Oil. You can use this on your beard to help with alleviating itchiness, dryness, and irritation of skin. And don't worry, no animals were used in testing this product except for myself. Use Kennedy's Choice Beard Balm for a softer, healthier, manageable beard that is made with natural ingredients. And trust me, I know a thing or two about beards. Visit thekennedyreport.com and check out the TKR store. The links for this are in the description. Father, how are you?
Good. How are you, Kennedy?
Very well. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not sure who Father Lovell is, he is the co-founder of the Coalition for Cancelled Priests. And we're going to talk about what a cancelled priest is throughout this episode. But Cole's notes, good priests out there getting canceled, sidelined in their diocese for, what was your penalty called? Non-judiciary, non-penal or something like that?
Yeah, non-judicial, non-penal way. I'm restricted in ministry in a non-judicial, non-penal way. It's all gobbledygook.
It's like I can neither confirm nor deny that you may or may not have faculties depending on who is or is not in charge. Yeah, it's that sort of thing. Lots to talk about. First, though, Father, there is a conference coming up that unfortunately you've asked me to speak at for the poor listeners. But tell us about this conference coming up in June.
So on June 23rd and 24th, we're having a 2-day conference to celebrate the 2-year anniversary of the founding of the Coalition for Cancelled Priests, as well as the 1-year anniversary of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. It was great last year at our conference. Dr. Peter Kwasniewski was able to announce that during his talk that Roe was overturned by the Supreme Court. So it's a wonderful time for Catholics to come together. It's also a chance for traditional Catholics and for the so-called Novus Ordo but conservative Catholics to come together and say, you know what, we're going to put our differences aside in order to support the canceled priests, because whether you fall on the side of tradition or conservative Novus Ordo, I think we all believe that we need to have good priests.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And canceling the faith is no good. Well, there were some canceled priests for good reasons back in the 1500s. They were called the Anglicans. And recently they just celebrated a, in air quotes, mass. It's not a mass, a service in St. John Lateran. If people don't know what happened there, I did do a show about it yesterday. It's kind of been making the rounds. A bishop, air quotes, bishop, who was at least for a time a Freemason. Apparently he may not be anymore, but for a long time, while being an Anglican priest, and while he was appointed a bishop, he was a Freemason and defended that. He's also divorced and remarried, so ticking off all the boxes for Catholicism there. And he oversaw the fake mass service in St. John Lateran, which is the Pope's Cathedral. And what was your initial reaction when you saw that?
Not surprising. Rome right now is so much into Communism, as long as it's not traditional Catholicism, that they will pretty much let anyone do whatever they want. I mean, was what this guy did as bad as the Pachamama services? Probably not, but that doesn't make it excusable. I do want to say one thing, at least of all the reports that I've been reading, they're claiming that this happened on the papal altar, which is the main altar of St. John Lateran. It wasn't. It looks like the pictures that I saw, it looks like a portable altar near the Cathedral. Again, that doesn't make it any better, but the papal altar is about as big in St. John Lateran as it is in St. Peter's. So, I mean, St.
Okay.
John Lateran is not a small church. And what's sad is that it is the head and mother church of all Roman churches throughout the world, not just the city, but throughout the world. It is the cathedral. It is the head church, and we have to realize that for them to do this, just basically sends a message to faithful Catholics who believe there is only one true religion, there is only one true faith, and it is only found in Catholicism.
So my thoughts when I saw that. So I this idea, is it worse, better or worse than the Pachamama? On the one hand, I don't know if it's worse, but on the other hand, in a way, I thought it almost was. And the reason was, the Pachamama thing was an overt act of idolatry. That's really bad. But I mean, I haven't kept on my high church, low church, Anglican Christology. I'm not really sure or sacramental theology. I don't really know if the high church Anglicans do believe a real consecration takes place, or if Christ is consubstantially present. But it seems to me that they kneel and adore, at least symbolically, the pretend Eucharist. Would you say that what happened there was an act of idolatry for that reason?
Yes, I think so, but it's hard to judge what those people were doing. I mean, bear in mind, they were just simply, it looks like pilgrims, Anglican pilgrims coming to Rome. My question is, why did this happen in the Pope's Cathedral when there's, as far as I know, 3 Anglican churches, and I put churches in air quotes there,
right,
in Rome? I mean, they have 3 parishes in Rome itself. Why do they have to go to the Pope's Cathedral? And, we have a statement, I don't know if you saw this, from the head of the chapter, Bishop Di Torra, basically saying that, it was a breakdown in communication. This should not have happened. We apologize. But, I mean, just judging by the vestments they were wearing, it looked like they basically took vestments out of St. John Lateran's sacristy and used Roman vestments. Now, obviously, Anglican vestments and Roman vestments look very similar, especially in the last 60 years or so. But, I mean, it's just very, very odd that this was allowed to happen. And was this statement by the head of the chapter of canons at St. John Lateran simply a response to the outrage, or are they truly sorry that this happened? That's the question.
Yeah, breakdown in communication. I'm trying to think. I mean, the steps you have to go through in order to, actually do anything in Rome, in the Vatican. There's security, there's clearance. I know, for example, when I went to Our Lady of Guadalupe, the shrine in Mexico City, you can say Mass there. But even then, you have to ask the security, and they sort of escort you to one of the side chapels. There's many of them sort of around the main cathedral. And then, you can even request to have the books and things like that, the rubrics, if you don't have them on you. And that's Mexico. I mean, Mexico it's a wonderful place, but, infrastructure and things being airtight the way they're run isn't really what Mexico is known for. But even there, in a pretty lackadaisical setting, you have to have some sort of permission from security. I can't imagine they could have found their way into the Pope's Cathedral and just sort of, waltzed in and said, "Hey, boys, you want to do a little bit of service here?" It must have been something that was on the calendar for at least weeks, I would think.
Oh, I would say absolutely. This had to have been approved by at least the sacristan of putting them on the schedule to do this.
Yeah, that's right.
Do this service. I mean, yeah. I mean, now, could it be? So, I mean, sorry to all of my Italian friends. Could it be that the Italians were just not paying attention and they thought, "Oh, he's a bishop from England," and they just assumed he was Catholic? Maybe, but still, they need to have. I could tell you right now, if Bishop Fillet went in there, or Bishop Schneider, or Cardinal Burke, and they said, "We want to celebrate a private traditional mass," they probably would have been arrested. So,
I don't even think they'd let Cardinal Sarah say a traditional mass in there.
No.
Yeah, I bet you they wouldn't even let him say a Novus Ordo ad Orientem.
No.
Yeah, that's astonishing. Well, Do you think, I was thinking about this, do you think that they should reconsecrate after that happened?
I was interesting. Just earlier today, I interviewed David L. Gray,
Hmm.
who's a big apologist against Freemasonry, and he thinks that they should, and I agree. I think there should be a rededication. It would be great to see Francis do it himself, but that's probably not going to happen. It's just this in the last 60, 70 years, just this lackadaisical type of turn that the entire church, but sadly, especially the Diocese of Rome, has taken. I mean, you've lived in Italy for a while. I've visited Italy 3, 4 times, and I'm just amazed how the churches are just not really kept up anymore. What I mean by kept up, I'm talking about fresh linens on the altar, a vesperal cloth, just trying to keep that. I understand throughout history that the Italians, at least out in the streets, they don't necessarily keep everything very clean. In fact, Cardinal Newman, when he was traveling through Milan, was shocked in the 19th century at how dirty the city was. But I'm talking about in the churches itself. There just seems to be this lackadaisical, doesn't matter, not that big of a deal, and you just have a lot of dirty places inside the church itself. And it's quite sad to see.
Yeah, that is something else. Well, there's another non-Catholic mass scheduled to be celebrated. It's an actual mass, at least. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's better in a sense, but it's well, they call him the Pope, actually. The Coptics, they do the Coptics from Egypt. They do call their patriarch the Pope. I don't understand the East-West schism at all. I understand that there is one, and I'm not denying it. But the reason I say this is because I know the Egyptian one is even more complicated in a way, because I think it goes back like to the 400s or something. There's sort of been a regional church there. Was it because they were Monophysites? Was the reason?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I would have to double check my notes. I knew a lot more about the Eastern schisms 20 years ago. But as far as I know, there's also a Catholic patriarch of Alexandria who also has the title of Pope. And we have to realize, too, the term Pope is just a familiar term. It's just a sign of affection. Okay, Papa. Yeah. That's what it is. I mean, the true title of the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, the Vicar of Christ, the servant of the servants of God. Sadly, Francis has dropped the title Vicar of Christ. I hope the next Pope restores it. It would be very good to see.
So he's set to celebrate a mass there in 3 weeks, May 14th. This patriarch of the Egyptian Coptic Church. Now, what's fascinating about this, though, is my understanding is that they obviously celebrate an ancient liturgy. I would imagine the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. Maybe I'm wrong on that, though, actually. I think that's maybe the Byzantine side. But nonetheless, an ancient liturgy, which I think Mark, was the Apostle Mark, did he get to Egypt? I think he started the Alexandrian Sea.
Mark, after he left Rome, remember, Mark was, again, I'm digging back into my history files in my brain here. Mark was originally with Paul, a disciple of Paul.
Right.
They seems to have a little bit of a spat, which they did eventually make up, as far as I can understand. But Mark went for a while to Rome to be with Peter.
Yep.
It's often believed that Mark's gospel is actually Peter's gospel, that Mark wrote it listening to Peter. And then after leaving Peter, he went to Alexandria to found the Church of Alexandria. And we always talk about the patriarchal sees, Rome, Antioch, Alexandria. Later editions were Constantinople and Jerusalem, but the 3 oldest ones are Rome, Antioch, and Alexandria. And it is because Rome and Antioch were considered to be founded by Peter himself, and at least as a patriarchy. Obviously, there was a church in Rome before Peter arrived. We know this more than likely from the Jews that came from Rome to Jerusalem at Pentecost. I always like to tell people, remember, Paul wrote to the Romans, a church already established, not by him. And but just simply because that more than likely Mark was the secretary to Peter, that was one of the reasons why Alexandria was given the title of that. And it was also because they were the 3 largest cities at the time in the empire.
Yeah, I'm actually just finished narrating Taylor Marshall's the second book in his series, the Sword and Serpent series, and it's centered largely with an Alexandrian theme, which is kind of cool. There's I Katerina is the Egyptians or the traditional spelling, but it's Catherine. Saint Catherine of Alexandria is one of the characters. It's quite cool, and they talk about the Christians in Alexandria there. So this is interesting because we just had a pretend service where nothing happened except for sacrilege and heresy, which is bad enough. But now we're going to have the Egyptian Coptic Pope celebrate a mass. I would imagine it's going to be ad orientem. I don't think that they're celebrating the Novus Ordo in the Coptic Orthodox Church. There are many. When people think the East is just sort of a safe haven, there are many Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic churches. For example, the Chaldeans, much of the Maronites, who have adopted versus populum facing the people in English. I did watch a little bit of a Maronite service the other day, and it was very strange because you could hear the sort of traditional chanting, but it was translated into English. And then when the priest did the sermon, he came down and had his like microphone on his, like the Garth Brooks microphone, and he came down and was talking like a Novus Ordo priest. It was very strange, but I imagine that's not going to happen with the patriarch of the Egyptian church. So this might be the first time in, I don't know, did Pope Benedict ever celebrate a traditional mass in there? I don't know. It's going to be the first time in a really long time where an ad orientem traditional liturgy is celebrated in the Lateran Cathedral. That's very strange.
It is. I don't think Pope Benedict ever celebrated as Pope a traditional mass. If he did it privately, that's one thing. But keep in mind that as Pope, if he celebrated the traditional mass in St. John Lateran, he would actually face east,
right?
Because to show the universal jurisdiction of the Pope. I don't know if that was also done in the other basilicas as well. I know at St. John Lateran, I've seen pictures, Pius XII, John the 23rd, when they celebrated Mass in the cathedral. It wasn't necessarily versus populum, it was ad orientem, it was actually facing east. But it would look like to us, modern people, it would look like they were facing the people. But it was just simply because the Pope, to show his universal jurisdiction.
So that is interesting. So, because I was reading about the Anglican so-called bishop who celebrated his service there. He actually was a traditionalist Anglican bishop. So I wonder if he's one of the high church, because I'm looking at the pictures from the service and they look like they're versus populum, but I guess that's east. So maybe he actually was celebrating. Anyway, so I wonder if when Pope Francis celebrates Mass in there, if he does it facing away, because anyway, I don't know. But interesting. Okay, well, this brings up something else I wanted to talk to you about, because what we're seeing here is obviously scandalous. I do hope, I would hope we all would, for a reunion between East and West. And obviously the Eastern churches and the Roman Catholic Church, we are much closer. There are a lot less barriers. I mean, we actually have real priests and real sacraments. They're technically speaking, you'd have to say the Eastern Orthodox are Catholic in the sense of there is only one priesthood, and if they're valid priests, there's a juridical division, but sacramentally we do belong in the same fold, at least in a sense. So the division is very sad. Nonetheless, the Catholic Church presently in Rome is okay with Anglican services, non-Catholic Orthodox traditional masses, but of course, as you said, there's not going to be the SSPX or any traditionalists for that matter saying Mass in there. And now we just have news coming it happened a couple days ago at this point, out of the Chicago area, where adoration is going to be basically cast aside as part of one of the events for the Eucharistic revival, I think. Can you explain what's happening with that?
I wish I could. Supich put out in the last couple of years basically his own little pamphlet, I can't even remember what it was called. I saw it the other day, and it was basically him describing what a Eucharistic revival should be. And it's just harkens back to the 1970s, focused on the people, focused on the community. Adoration takes away from the sacrifice. This is all things that, were shoved down our throats when I was in seminary, college seminary in Chicago, that we don't really need adoration, that it takes away from the Mass. And some were arguing that on Twitter. They got lambasted for arguing that. And
I saw that.
Now, what people need to realize, what Cardinal Cupich said, in my opinion, was a little bit petty. So basically, he's still allowing them to process through the streets with the Blessed Sacrament. It has to be in a ciborium, not in a monstrance. Now, at least according to Novus Ordo rubrics, both of those are acceptable for adoration. Okay. Those are both allowed. I would have to double check the traditional missal to see whether or not with a ciborium. Obviously, on Holy Thursday, you process with the ciborium, but that's what he's allowing. So I could honestly see the neocons coming out and saying, well, this is part of the rubrics, that you can just use a ciborium instead of a monstrance. But they're obviously going to have the monstrance. They're, because this is going around the country. And what people have to realize, when you get that little technical things, and like I said, it was petty to do this, is it's just showing that even the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, they can't even have unity amongst themselves. How to do a Eucharistic revival, which was completely their idea. So you have Bishop Cousins up in Minnesota, basically saying, this is how we should do it. And then you have Cardinal Cupich saying, no, this is how we're going to do it here. So there's not even unity amongst the USCCB when it comes to things like this, which you would think that doing a Eucharistic revival is all about bringing the unity together. But people like Cardinal Cupich, they don't want the unity. They want to make a point, and they want to make a political statement, in my opinion, with the Blessed Sacrament.
It's all very communist, and I'll explain what I mean by that. If you want to understand, if the listener or the viewer, if you want to understand how can you tell if somebody is a Marxist, you look for the bureaucracy. Communism is about divide and conquer. It's about taking the will out of the people to have any principles, essentially, so that they can become much more governable. And obviously, we're not anarchists. We're not saying there's no such thing as authority. We get that. But the reason why the communists like to do things like this is because basically they make it exhausting and demoralizing to try to do anything that is just simply good. So everyone, again, the Pope's planers, et cetera, will come through, or the bishop's planers in this point, and say, well, as you said, technically it's not against the rubrics and blah, 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 blah. Well, for one, we'd have to check the rubrics, and there's probably something in there about, you need a grave reason to not do the adoration, to not do it with the monstrance. There's probably something in there, but that's subjective. Nonetheless, though, what you have here is you have this desire by good Catholics to want to process the Holy Eucharist in the streets of Chicago and other cities. And there's a momentum, there's an inertia behind it. And then they get to Chicago, and the bishop does something completely unnecessary that forces them to basically tone down their excitement. And this is what communist governments do. They make it impossible to do what you just believe is good and right. And instead you have to satisfy their petty whims. So eventually you just stop trying. This is like this is very similar to what he did with Institute of Christ the King, where he essentially said, you can still be traditional except one day a month. And it's presented of, hey, I'm letting you have almost all of it. You're not giving me any. And of course, that's not what it is. That's not the spirit of the thing. It was just like when we go through the lockdowns and people would say, what's your problem? Like, the vaccine passports aren't a big deal. 95% of people can still go in the restaurants. That's almost everybody. It's not actually affecting that many people. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is that it's a huge inconvenience for the restaurants, for one, who didn't want to be a part of this for the most part. And secondly, and also everywhere, it was everywhere had a passport here, basically. But also it's dividing a certain subset of people against another subset of people. And what this is going to do, in this Eucharistic revival movement, if we can call it that, if it even qualifies, is that there are going to be people who are totally fine with this because, obedience covers a multitude of sins for many people these days. Obedience shall be the whole of the law. Do what somebody else who is over you wilt. That's the whole of the law, to paraphrase Aleister Crowley's Satanist expression. And they're going to take it in stride and act as if following this petty demand is almost a sign of holiness. That's how it's usually put forth. It's like, well, we grow in obedience, we grow in holiness. And then there's going to be the people who just have a Catholic sense and a gut and going to go, this is stupid. And now it's going to create an actual division amongst the participants themselves. To me, this strikes me as sheer Marxist bureaucracy.
No, I would say so. And to be honest with you, I look at it from a very simple perspective. Chicago is the largest Slavic city outside of Eastern Europe. It is the largest Polish city outside of Poland. All right. It has a huge Mexican population. It has a huge Filipino population. It has a huge Vietnamese population. What do all of those cultures love? Processions. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
And what I think Cardinal Cupich is worried about is that if this starts to come through Chicago, they're going to come out in waves in order to adore our Lord. And that doesn't look good for the modernist, leftist, Marxist ideology of it's about the people, not about a piece of bread. All right. That's where it's coming down to. We have to realize Cardinal Cupich is the one that led the charge. Fortunately, it didn't take, but still 69 bishops signed on with him to basically say that the preeminent moral issue in the United States is abortion. He wanted to say, no, it's not that anymore. I think he wanted to say it was the environment or something like that. And, it's just this is where their mindset is. They want to be loved by the world because they love the world.
Well, you shared something with me on Twitter earlier, Father. I'm going to bring that up here. Yeah. This is fine. This is good. This is, ladies and gentlemen, you can see here. So our friend over at Tridentine Brewing, Mr. Alcorn, he tweeted, looking at my pennant from the 1926 Eucharistic Congress, which had 800,000 people participate in it at Soldier Field and around Chicago, made me realize how far we have fallen to a point where the current Archbishop of Chicago today does not want our Lord exposed in procession. And you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, or if you're listening on the audio-only podcast, we're looking at a pennant. And right now we're looking at a poster as if it's, an event and it's advertised. And actually, this is good timing. It takes place the same time of year as your event this year, Father. Yep. And we see here these photos. I mean, this is extraordinary. I mean, there are so many people that this looks like flowers in the field. I mean, and you look here, look at all these nuns. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen so many people in one place. I'm looking at this.
Bear in mind, there were a couple of gatherings at Soldier Field. Soldier Field now probably could hold 60,000. 100 years ago, Soldier Field was a lot bigger. It could hold about 110,000. They had, I have a program book from 100 years ago from the Eucharistic Congress, and there were pictures of an all-men's night vigil. All the men, over 100,000, holding candles.
Oh my goodness.
At Soldier Field. And, in our Western mindset, when we see a stadium at night with a lot of candles, because of the history of the last 80 years, we automatically go back to Nuremberg and what evil came out of there, with their torchlight processions and stuff. But to see that these men were coming together, just men and young men coming together in order to adore our Lord, it was a reminder to me, at least, when I first saw that picture, that there really is hope in the darkness, and think about this. This is 1926 in Chicago. People talk now about how bad the crime was in Chicago. 1926, Al Capone was at his height. The mafia was at their height in Chicago. Chicago's always been a rough and tumble city, but it's also always been a very Catholic city. And I think we talked about this either the last time I interviewed you or the last time you interviewed me. When I was born, there were over 450 parishes in the Archdiocese of Chicago. Supich is happy to say that by 2025, it will be down to 200. Talk about slashing and burning, and then turning around and calling it Renew My Church. That's what they're calling it, And we were always told all of these parishes that were only a block, maybe 2 blocks away from each other, well, they were just built because the Irish couldn't get along with the Italians and the Italians couldn't get along with the Polish. No, they were built because they needed the room to fit everybody for Mass. And all of these parishes on Sunday had anywhere from 5 to 6 Masses on Sunday. Bear in mind, 100 years ago, you didn't have a Saturday evening vigil Mass. Okay, you had to get Mass in and at a specific time. Even some traditionalists don't realize this. You could only celebrate Mass on Sundays under the old Code of Canon Law 1 hour after or 1 hour before sunup until 1 p.m. So you had to make sure you had enough Masses for everybody to attend. That was a lot of work.
It's unbelievable. I was looking at that picture. And, I would imagine if I were to find something from Quebec or even, maybe even Toronto, I mean, there's been a bunch of Catholics in Ontario for a long time. And it's heartbreaking. I know, I don't like to peddle too much of the scandal and doom and gloom. There's a place for it. I get it. News is news. And I don't like to be too morose. But I was looking at that and I was actually emotional a little bit because I was thinking about the devotion to, it's literally called the Eucharistic Congress. And it was, today we have World Youth Day and these sorts of things. It was an event in a similar sense insofar it was a big Catholic event. But you would have that many Catholics come out. I guess a lot of Catholics showed up for Pope Francis's visit, but that's also in an age of everyone being able to jump on a plane. I would imagine the majority of people in that area would have been from a driving distance or train distance around from Chicago. This is 1926. It was not common for everybody to have an automobile. There were no planes. Yes, you could get on trains and stuff, but again, this is a time. This is in a time where a lot of people didn't have extra means to do lots of travel. People had huge families because no one was contracepting. This would have been a real big endeavor to get to this event, and the majority of people, I would imagine, would have been from the Chicago area. It's not like when Pope Francis visited Washington or Philadelphia, 10 years ago or whenever it was, or 8 years ago, where people are flying from all over the world because it's almost like something to do. This, or coming from all over. This was a time when people would have been largely from the neighborhoods of the actual city. And that many people, I bet you a lot of non-Catholics were there. And I bet you a lot of conversions took place after seeing it. I bet you the things they were hearing were absolutely orthodox and traditional and conservative. The liturgy, the liturgical processions and things would have been amazing. This is less than 100 years ago. That's basically one lifetime. And 800,000 Catholics descend on Chicago for a Catholic event. How on earth, this is a massive question, but we've got time. How on earth do we get here? How do we like to say Vatican II, we like to say these things, but those answers are really simple. How do we get from 100,000 Catholics adoring Christ in Chicago to a bishop of Chicago who is basically the complete opposite?
Well, I always like to remind people the seeds were already planted then. Look at the encyclicals coming out of the Vatican in the 19th and early part of the 20th century. I read the encyclicals of Pius IX, Leo XIII, Pius X, Pius XI, Benedict XV, and they're already railing against socialism, railing against Freemasonry, railing against communism. I was just reading yesterday because I was looking for something up. Quadragesimos Annus, which is Pius XI's 40th anniversary of Rerum Novarum. And you would have thought that even at that point, the church was on the ropes because of that. So when trads say to me, well, everything was better before Vatican II, a real trad wouldn't say that. A real trad would say, no, there was a decline already happening. It was just seemed like it climaxed at Vatican II. or it was their coming out party at Vatican II. They were building up for a very long time. And it was interesting. I mentioned earlier that I was interviewing David L. Gray, and we brought this subject up as well. And David L. Gray said when he was a Freemason, he said, we would take road trips to Chicago because Chicago was seen, even today, as the center of Freemasonry in the United States for the lodge. That's where they would go. So, I mean, bear in mind, this was going on even 100 years ago. So there was this battle stupendous. But the thing was, Cardinal Mundelein 100 years ago wanted to fight. Catholics wanted to fight in order to preserve their faith. And remember, these were immigrants, especially in Chicago, Toronto, at this time 100 years ago. They would have been off the boat. I mean, that would have been that generation.
Literally off the boat. They weren't flying over.
I mean, from Ireland, from Italy, that would have been, and Poland, fighting for their faith and standing up for it to keep their identity. Well, what slowly happened? Okay, they wanted to make their identity American. And what's American identity? It's being a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. All right, that's not what we need anymore. And instead of trying to bow to the world, okay, we need cardinals and bishops and priests that are willing to stand up and fight in order to maintain Catholic values. This is what we're missing out on. And to be honest with you, this is, I mean, if you want to talk about the main reason we're having a conference, it's not just to celebrate an anniversary, all right? It's to show Catholics, to have several hundred come together and say, you're not alone, okay? We're going to stand as a house united, okay? And we're going to bring the faith of our fathers back. It's going to take time. It's going to be slow work. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but we have to do it.
Two stories. I don't know if I ever told you the story. My Nono, God rest his soul, he used to go to Chicago. So my mom came over on a boat from Italy in 1967 when she was, I think, 10 years old. I think I just gave her age away. Sorry, Mom. And her older brother was 15 or something, and the little sister was like 2 or 3. Anyway, they came over from Italy. My Nono was around 40 when they moved, and Italy hadn't recovered yet. The 70s were actually quite good to Italy, and only a few years later his lifestyle would have been radically improved in Italy, but how could he know? And they hadn't really recovered since the war. And so he came over. They're from a very small village in Tuscany. And they came over, and he moved to Stratford, Ontario. They came through Ellis Island, and my Nono's uncle, though, so his uncle lived in Chicago, and he never had children. Him and his wife just couldn't have children. And so Nono was like his surrogate son, and he loved him very much because my Nono's father had died when my Nono was very young. And so at that time, you could get on a train in Stratford, Ontario, and if people don't know where that is, Thomas Edison actually lived in Stratford. And you can go in, there's a little inn in Stratford, Ontario called Edison's. I think it's still open. And he worked on the railway in St. Mary's, Ontario, which is down the road. And he had to flee.
Kennedy, isn't the Shakespearean Theater there as well?
Yes, there's a massive Shakespearean.
Yeah,
that's where Christopher Plummer's from. The Sound of Music fame. I think he was born in Toronto, but there's a street in Stratford called Christopher Plummer Lane. He acted in the thing there. Sadly, that festival has become a woke dumpster fire. They did Midsummer Night Dream just before the lockdown, so like 2019. And they didn't change the play, but they added a beginning where it was a man and a man who just got married, and then they started to have a conversation as their honeymoon was beginning, and then their dream together was Midsummer Night's Dream. So the actual play was normal, but they had to add that in for no reason. That's it's a problem. But anyway, Edison lived in Stratford, and he had to skip town without collecting his last paycheck because one of his failed inventions. Because what he was an operator, like that would send the telegrams and the communications and things like that to the drivers. And he tried to make an invention that would do it automatically, and it failed. So there was almost a massive railway crash, and he was going to be raked over the coals. So he skipped town after it happened and never came back for his paycheck. So Thomas Edison is from a city he lived there. Anyway, but my Nono used to get on the train, and many weekends he would go down to Chicago. And he would paint houses on the weekend with his uncle, who owned a little bottega, like a little grocery store. And Nono had grown up under Mussolini, which wasn't as bad as people say it is in some ways, but then there was the communists after that. So he didn't really trust the government very much. And so he would come back from Chicago and he didn't want to declare his money. So he would tape it all to his stomach and he would just put his shirt over it. And he actually ended up paying off the house in like 4 or 5 years at the time because he would put all that money to the house. Anyway, so I've never been to Chicago, actually, so I'm excited to come down in the summer, but my mom's side of the family, there's a long family history there. I wonder if any of my relatives are still alive there, actually. I should look it up. But the second thing I wanted to say, though, is, we look at what has happened with this destruction in Chicago, and it makes me think, these men that are in charge, it can't be an accident at this point. I mean, they have to have eyes to see. It's kind of like when we talk about politicians and we say, oh, maybe they're just bad at economics. And it's like, no, they know what's happening. Like they're doing the thing and the thing is happening and they've been doing it for 30 or 40 years. Why would someone become a bishop? Why would someone become a priest if they don't want to actually promote the Catholic faith? I mean, is Supich from Chicago originally?
No, he's originally from Omaha.
So I'm thinking, these people that are from these places and they know there was a time of Catholic glory, why would they even become a priest if this is what they want to do? Have you ever, maybe you have some insight into that? I mean, there's so many men who have entered the seminary who clearly hate Catholicism. Why are they even there?
They like the so-called clerical lifestyle.
Yeah.
Look at McCarrick. He was able to hide what he was doing behind the collar, behind the cloth. And what we're seeing here is that it was really a whole culture. And
yeah,
it is infected not just the American church. In fact, some would say, and maybe it's because of evangelical Protestantism propping up conservative Catholics in the United States, we fared a little bit better. I mean, I look at the Canadian Bishops' Conference, the European Bishop Conference, the Latin American Bishops' Conference, and I'm thinking to myself, well, there's at least a few in the USCCB that are Catholic. Granted, we want them to stand up for the traditional Mass, more traditional values, more traditional teaching on Christ the King. Yes, absolutely. One thing that I love about your book, if I might just take a moment to plug your book, thank you for sending it to me early to read, was that people forget it wasn't just about the Latin Mass for Marcel LeFevre. It was about they were changing or attempting to change church teaching on the role of the church in the state. Okay. And, that great conversation between Cardinal Ratzinger at the time and Archbishop LeFevre, that's what it really comes down to. And we have to keep that in mind.
Just if I can do a shameless plug here, I guess it is my show, so it's not that shameless. But my book is #1 bestseller in church history right now, which I guess I picked it right. So that's I don't know. That's a pretty, I never thought that would happen. It's only been not even 48 hours. And it's #3 presently in the Catholic section. I got beat out by St. Faustina. She always one-ups me. But I did beat the warning. Yeah, I did beat the warning book. So I was joking with a friend of mine. By the way, you can click the links in the description, ladies and gentlemen, for my information and for fathers, and we'll have a link to the conference there. But you can buy my book in the description. I was joking with a friend earlier. I said, I just got to find evidence that some mystic has seen Archbishop LeFevre as coming back at the warning, or something like that, and we could have a bestseller book. I'm joking, but there's all. It's pretty good to be up there with those because those ones sell a ton of them. But that brings me. You bring up Archbishop LeFevre and the Christ, the result, the place of Christ the King. That was a huge part of his resistance. Let's call it that in the true sense, against what had happened. Well, one point I wanted to ask earlier, and I forgot, but I just remembered. So the seeds for destruction were there before the council. This is obvious. Pope Francis, Taylor Marshall, Freudian slip. Taylor Marshall, and he's always famous for saying Vatican II was the parade, the preparations. And actually, I recommend everybody read, and you can listen to it for free. Angelus Press did put out a free professional audiobook of They Have Uncrowned Him, which is Marcel Lefebvre's magnum opus. People look at Open Letter to Confused Catholics. That's a good book. This is a great book, wonderful book. I've read it 2 or 3 times. But They've Uncrowned Him is the summa of it's the summa of the social reign of Christ. I mean, there's not a better book out there, kind of putting it all together in this post-conciliar era. And he talks about, at the Second Vatican Council, he calls it the robber council, and he talks about how at the council, they were prepared. This is one of the reasons why the conservatives were so on their heels. People think that most of the bishops were not these leftists. They just were not. The church had problems, but it was still doctrinally very healthy. There were seeds of destruction, but they hadn't flowered. And but these influential bishops in these very liberal parts of Europe, they had already a plan. They had pamphlets ready, they had printing houses ready, they had media relationships ready, and as soon as the council started, it was like election season. It was like they were going to get Biden elected, and they were going to do whatever they had to do. And the sort of good-natured bishops who weren't a part of that had no idea what was happening, And so they were playing catch-up the whole time. That's what Lefebvre sort of calls it the robber councils, because it was really more political than it was doctrinal. It was about changing the perception that people have of the Catholic Church and the perception the Church should have of the world. It was a very meta. That's why the Second Vatican Council documents are so difficult to see where the seeds of destruction are, is because it's not one thing. It's not one statement. People like to boil it down. It's like a meta-narrative. It's this, to use a phrase from the disgraced Cardinal Bernardin, it's a seamless garment of this spirit, this temperament of modernism that is so hard to see. But one thing that was stopping full-on destruction was the traditional Latin Mass. And I'll let you elaborate on this, but the reason I say that is because the Mass, was it a golden age before the Second Vatican Council and the new Mass? No, it was not a golden age. There's really, in a way, never been a golden age. There's always been, St. Paul is talking about heresies and schisms, for goodness sake, in the first 50 years of the Church. But lex orandi, lex credendi. In English, we would say, you are what you eat. The way, literally, the more you receive the Eucharist, the more you are, you experience theosis in a sense. So, but Catholics, even if they were in public schools in America, even if they were, joining the Elk Lodge, which wasn't really Freemasonry, it was kind of like white masonry. It was acceptable technically because there was no secret rituals and it was okay. Even if they were kind of on the fringe, every Sunday and feast days and holy days, and because of custom, they would go to Mass. And when they would go to Mass, even if they're in mortal sin, which many people are, and the confessional is always open, they're there, and what they're seeing is the most important thing in the universe, and it's clear that it's the most important thing in the universe. Do you think, let's take, all potential sociological things aside, but just if that Mass never changed, do you think we would have seen the destruction we've seen?
It's hard to comment on something that hasn't happened. I think the destruction would have been slower.
Right.
But I'm going to take Chicago, for example. There's what's called the Irish Low Mass, okay, where it was already in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in Chicago, maybe even earlier, where it was getting to the point where they were just rushing through the Mass. They were doing low Masses only on Sundays, maybe with some music and organ, but that was it. And it's not just Chicago, but Chicago is what I'm familiar with from that time period and talking to priests that were alive. There was already a lot of abuses going on in the Mass. And I'm not talking about the 65 Missal or, post 55. I'm talking about they just weren't following the rubrics even then. And you've been very fortunate since your reversion to pretty much be going to a chapel that you don't have to worry about that. I've seen traditional Masses that have been train wrecks, okay?
Really?
The so-called adult Masses, especially 20, 30 years ago when you had older priests who were ordained under it, and we thought, well, this is just like riding a bike, even though they didn't do it for a few decades. They tried to do it again, and it was just an absolute train wreck to watch. So I think that it's certainly the traditional Mass is a pillar when done correctly.
Right.
I don't think I know for sure you can't say the same thing, because here's the conservative argument, the neocon argument. Well, if they just celebrated the Novus Ordo by following the rubrics, well, a couple of things. I've never actually seen the Novus Ordo celebrated according to the rubrics specifically. One, because it's ingrained in you in the Novus Ordo, don't be a rubricist.
Yeah.
Two, if we actually followed what the Second Vatican Council said, most of the Mass would still be in Latin.
Yeah.
It's rare to see that. Now, some will say, well, St. John Cantius, they have 11 a.m., they have a Novus Ordo Latin Mass. Okay, but even there, at least last time I saw it, which was 20 years ago, and I used to serve it, they would still not follow all the rubrics. They would say Eucharistic prayer number 2, which is specific. You're not supposed to use that Eucharistic prayer on Sundays, but again, just to make it go a little bit faster. So there's always a Novus Ordo Mass as kind of a cutting and trimming. And
right.
Yes, priests might personally follow the rubrics as best as he can, but then you still have the banal music or something like that. But if the traditional Mass, if you actually follow what you're supposed to do, low Mass or high Mass, it is going to be edifying to the people. And I don't know if you've noticed this, Kennedy. I certainly did 25, 30 years ago when I started attending the traditional Mass. I think a pontifical high Mass or even a solemn high Mass is still very much a hook for people.
Yeah.
But when you start to experience it, you start to see the spirituality of a beautiful low Mass. You just like that quietness of being able to go into kind of a dimly lit church and to see the priest come out and to barely hear anything, but know that you're participating. It's just something very beautiful, and there's just a quiet about it. And it's not quietism, I want to make that clear, but it's just this beautiful act of, I don't need to speak. I don't need to say anything. I can adore and participate still fully in Mass. It's wonderful.
Well, as a father of 5 children, God willing, more soon, my oldest is 7. It's a very loud household. We homeschool. I work from home. My beautiful, wonderful wife, she's recovered enough from her head injury that she's able to get out and do a little more things now. So she's out with the kids. Actually, we have an au pair from Germany visiting, and they're out. She's showing her the North American thrift shop, the Value Village, and things like that, because they don't really have as much of that. And so she's excited. She's taking her shopping, and the kids are excited. So here, I usually hear the footsteps above my head, though. I'm in my sound. It's sound treated, but it's not soundproof. If there's kids in the homeschool room, there it's like, thunder above my head. So when I go to a nice low Mass with the kids on Sunday morning, like 8:30, and it's just quiet, everyone's quiet. Oh my goodness, it's like my favorite part of the week. Not just because it's Mass, but just because it's quiet. So I really, really love I absolutely adore a low Mass. Okay, so you're a canceled priest. You experienced the nonsense, there's lots of them. Father Scott, Father Altman, all these priests. And we should distinguish as well. The Coalition for Canceled Priests has a very strict policy about who's allowed to be associated with it. It's not for derelict priests; it's for priests who've just been unjustly sidelined, and that's
If I could just comment, you said earlier about the first canceled priests were the ones in England that left. It's not actually priests that did something wrong.
That's right.
Priests, because of cancel culture, have been sidelined. And I realize you're a polyglot. I'm not, but I realize that the word "cancel" doesn't really translate very well into the Romance languages. But it was very hard for us to come up with the term. But because of this modern, but not modernist, but this modern term that has developed over the last 5-10 years of cancel culture, we wanted to show, hey, there is a similarity going on in the church where bishops basically sideline priests, not for doing anything wrong, okay, but for standing up for the truth, and not just the traditional Mass, for standing up and preaching against abortion and contraception, for standing up and saying, "You guys ridiculous? We're gonna make the boys go to the boys' room and the girls go to the girls' room in our Catholic school." I mean, why are we having even discussions about this? They got canceled for that. All right, we have one priest that I've talked to who was canceled because he encouraged men to do Exodus 90. And
Really?
one of them claimed that he got anorexia or something from doing Exodus 90. Now, if anybody actually looked at Exodus 90, it's kind of more the modernist type of, well, you can fast, but it's just one meal plus two smaller meals. It's not like the hardcore from 150 years ago when all Catholics did not eat before 3:00 during Lent. You know, I mean, it's a lot easier. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in any way dissing Exodus 90. One thing that I like about it is that it's telling men, get off your electronics. Okay. Now, you and I, we live in a world where we're constantly having to use electronics. Yeah. Okay. But I made it a policy across the coalition this year. Get off your phones, don't text, don't email, don't do anything, and just get yourself into the prayer room. And that was for all of our volunteers, our employees, and for the priests. Just, allow the quiet to just envelop you so you could be with our Lord on Calvary and with our Lord at the tomb.
Well, I've done Exodus 90 officially twice. And, being a North American man who's used to excess, it was difficult, but it was just no snacks, no sweets.
That must be hard for the Italian side of you.
It's true. It's very hard. No alcohol, except for Wednesdays and Fridays, there was no fasting. It was just only it was 3 regular meals a day, like boo-hoo, and then on Fridays it was just basically something like, it was the basic 2 small meal fasting. Or a lot of guys would just do intermittent fasting and just skip a meal. It's easier to kind of just do that. I get that. It's easier than having what's a small meal, what's a snack, whatever. Just have one little meal and supper. It was, anorexia, goodness gracious, it's not even possible. So you mentioned, though, what's something you just said made me think of, first in the church, then in the world. So you're talking about how you're looking for a word, canceled. But really, cancellation is common in our society today. I personally have been canceled. I haven't really done a huge show on this, but I was reprimanded by the Ontario College of Teachers for saying Catholic things in a Catholic school, but technically under the auspices of the government. So I was told my Catholic beliefs, actually, it wasn't even what I said in the classroom, it was my books. And I was told that things in Terror of Demons constituted abuse to the students, even though it wasn't students who complained. Anyway, so I know what it's like to be canceled. I had to give up my license to teach in Ontario. Otherwise, I would have to face like a penalty and suspension and all this kind of stuff, and I resigned anyway. But this is only possible because, there's an expression, as goes the church, so goes the world. The first major cancellation, I would say, happened at flashpoint, I would say, first major cancellation kind of is the Second Vatican Council. You think back to that moment when Cardinal Ottaviani is basically, for people who don't know, he was the doctrinal chief in the world. He was the head of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, as it used to be called. And, he was the best theologian there was alive, basically. He was, you think Ratzinger was good, you got to go back and you got to read Ottaviani and Marie Del Val and stuff like that before him. And was it Marie Del Val under Pius X?
Yes, as Secretary of State.
Oh, Secretary, not CDF. I was mixing them up. But anyway, you got to go back and you got to read these fellas. And Ottaviani was basically blind. He was elderly and, had problems with his vision. And he was speaking in front of the council fathers, and they basically laughed him off stage. He was canceled. He was effectively done after that from a perspective of his influence, because it was seen, he was basically canceled by the crowd. Just how deep does cancel culture go in your average diocese from your experience?
It goes, I think, pretty deep. The so-called lavender mafia, I think, is active in most dioceses. In fact, probably all. Now, to the degree, it depends on each diocese. All right. I think more in some dioceses than others. but they very much, because of that homosexual mindset, it's very much, we're going to cancel you if you don't agree with us. It's as simple as that. And what we have to realize is that for priests especially, I mean, somebody asked, what's the hardest thing about being a canceled priest? It's just how most of the presbyterate just ignores you. I mean, I do have a few active priests in my diocese who are strong supporters and will always be, and I'm grateful to that. But you wouldn't believe how many of my former students who are now priests just ignore me. They will not return a phone call. They will not do anything. If I go to the Chrism Mass, and some people say, well, why are you going to the Novus Ordo Christus Mass? I go to the Novus Ordo Chrism Mass just to be there to stir things up a little bit. I don't do anything. I'm just there.
You're just
they
there,
don't like it that I'm there. I don't could celebrate. I sit in choir. But, getting together beforehand as they're vesting, I'll be standing there. And it's just amazed how many priests will just walk the other way if they see me. They don't even want to be seen walking past me. These are supposed to be my brothers.
Yeah.
This is the tough thing. And one thing, and this is what we did a couple of weeks ago here at the Coalition's house where I'm speaking to you from, is we had, during the octave, we had 8 or 9 priests come down. And just to spend time to have that fraternity, 8 or 9 priests from several different dioceses across the country, but came together, cooked each other's meals, we talked, we took walks, we just had Catholic priestly fraternity, and it really recharged everybody's batteries, including my own, even though I was running around being the host. I didn't realize how quickly I could wash and make a bed, but I'm becoming an expert at making beds. So it's amazing, because our house only has 4 or 5 bedrooms, but and the priests came in shifts, but it was just great to see so many of the priests come and to be able to relax and to be in a spot where they could talk freely and not have to look over their shoulder. Active and canceled priests came. Right. And it was very good. And, one thing that I have to say, if we can get back to your book,
sure,
is that you could almost entitle your book SSPX, a defense, or as you say, defense, of the Catholic priesthood. Okay, a defense of the Catholic priesthood, because that was always LeFevre's goal. And everyone can criticize or praise LeFevre for a lot of things. I get it, all right? And I also realize that even for some people who might not go as harsh as others in criticism, I can understand the qualms of conscience about the consecrations, although I do think LeFevre was justified, but I could understand that qualm. But it was what LeFevre did in founding Uncrowned was not to set up a parallel church, not even to set up an institute of religious life or society of apostolic life. It was to set up a seminary so that men can be formed to be proper priests. Okay. And that's one thing that we're trying to do at the Coalition, is we're trying to emulate that so that all priests that come here, including myself, can kind of fill in those gaps, because I only met my first society priest in March of 2021. But since then, all the priests that I've met of the society, which has been 6 or 7, I'm always impressed at how well trained they are to be priests. And warning to traditional groups out there, who might be looking for an independent but still validly consecrated bishop, make sure you don't allow men who are not prepared theologically and philosophically to be ordained. This is, we're starting to see this under the guise of, well, it's emergency times. And I agree, it's emergency times. We're not to the stage of emergency, though, where our priests don't need good formation. And one thing that I loved about your book is that you hit it so well that we need, and this is what LeFevre saw in the 60s, we need priests properly trained to be priests. And if the traditional movement starts moving away from that, we're going to have serious problems.
Yeah, and with the society seminary, it went the opposite direction in the sense that in the beginning, you could become a priest, I think, in 4 or 5 years. Now, I mean, it was a little bit different too, because there was a more intimate education. There was only 9 men the first year, and you can have round-the-clock studying and formation and conferencing and stuff. And obviously, it's bigger now. But now it's 7 years in the American one and 6 in the European one, or the one in Acon. I don't know if all of them are like that. And the only reason there is because the American or the European high schools still offer a much more superior humanities education. So they've at least been exposed to philosophy, even if they're exposed to the bad stuff, they've heard the good stuff, so they have something to pull off of. But I have a friend. He's just visiting, and he's at the U.S. seminary. And we were chatting the other night. And wow, what a great seminary it sounds like. And it's funny, he's actually a convert from Protestantism. And he read his way into the Catholic Church about 4 years ago. And he's a young man. He's in his early 20s. And he just realized pretty quickly he had a vocation. And I really think he's going to make it. And I think he's going to be a great priest if he does. But he says the first year he's there at the seminary, most of the kids are actually from traditional Catholic homes, the vast majority. There's a few that are kind of independent converts. But the thing that they do for the first year is their seminary rector just says, you guys don't understand. You're all Protestants, and I'm going to show you this year. And these are kids who are from traditional Catholic homes. And he just shows them the depth of the way of thinking that's just in everything that happens in North America, especially, that is a Protestant way of life. And it's things you would never expect. It's like even the work-life balance. The Europeans, okay, we can't stand the socialism, and it's annoying when they enact the socialist ways of things, but their insistence that one shouldn't work more than X amount of hours a week and that should have these certain times with family and stuff. Yes, these are baseless traditions now that are just nothing more than custom, but they're actually Catholic. Mm-hmm. They're getting together for, everyone would have these certain rituals. The church bells will go off. They'd say the prayers. There was all these reasons why these rhythms of life, and they literally just make you healthier. And grace builds on nature. And when your nature is healthier, there's more room for grace to grow as well. So they spend a lot of time just forming the actual heartbeat of the actual physical man. That first year at the seminary, is teaching them how to actually be human. Which is something we don't even understand anymore. This is totally off topic, but I know we got a little bit of time left, and I was just wondering, this is literally nothing to do with it, but what do you think about AI? What do you think about artificial intelligence? Because that stuff freaks me out.
Yeah, it's starting to freak me out. I just saw, and I don't ask me because I don't watch the news, but maybe somebody sent it to me, a video from CBS, I think it was 60 Minutes, and it was basically they looked like little Terminators playing soccer. And apparently they taught themselves how to play soccer. And, Fred sent it to me and said, there's going to be the T1000s here in about 10 years. It's quite interesting because bad will be the cause of his own destruction, And 70, 80 years ago, we thought that was going to be the Cold War and East and West blowing each other up, and that still might happen, by the way. Take a look at what's happening in Ukraine and Russia right now. And, Biden basically claiming that, they're not afraid to use nuclear weapons if they need to. I'm like, oh, that's going to go over well.
That's fun.
But, it's just creating things that are going to eventually destroy us. We have to be very careful of that, especially as we move farther and farther away from God. And we're even moving farther and farther away from a man-centric type of understanding, where it's becoming we're worshiping nature and we're worshiping what we create. We're living in a society right now that basically says that Kennedy Hall's kids can go and mutilate themselves, and if Kennedy Hall tries to stop them, Kennedy Hall will be arrested.
Yeah.
That's the type of society we're living in. So you're going to be surprised if we might do that. But at the same time, I always tell people that we have to have the hope that Christ has won. We're in the Easter season right now. Our duty, our vocation, no matter whether we're clergy or laity, man or woman, our vocation is to save as many souls before the end times. We are going to be, particular and general judgment is going to be, how many souls did we bring to Christ? That's so important for us to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's true. And it reminds me, this insistence on this technocratic AI stuff I was listening to a conference with Bishop Williamson. Yes, he's very controversial, but he's also, I think he's a genius. Geniuses get in trouble a lot, though. Bobby Fischer was a genius, and he got in trouble for similar reasons, but he was still a genius, chess master and stuff. I mean, there's something about a brain that it's almost like a race car that can. It's just an incredible machine. It can also get in some crazy crashes. It's kind of comes with the territory. And Williamson was in this interview recently. They're actually quite good interviews. I recommend everyone go listen to them. If you just look at Bishop Williamson, they're the most recent things up there, and they're professionally done and very well done. And he talked about his education, and he was raised nominal Anglican, didn't have any care for chapel service at the Anglican school or anything like that. But he kept going back to the fact that the education he had was so excellent because it taught him how to be human. And what he was referring to was, they'd read the classics of antiquity. He learned the Greek and Latin scripts and things like that. And because of that, it opened up this window to, we call it pagan society. And yes, they were pagan before Christ, but they were human pagans. You read the great classics of antiquity and, the great comedies and things like that of the Greeks. And of course, it's shame if they believe these gods are gods rather than demons and all that kind of stuff. But their human nature, their human passions, the questions of morality, they were real. They were so real to these people that they were wrestling with them as very real things rather than just abstract concepts. Whereas now, goodness gracious, AI, I'm just waiting for the moment when there's going to be, I'm waiting for the moment when there's going to be something like, a fake press conference from Pope Francis saying that women can be priests, and it's going to be on CNN and it's going to be AI. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happened, to be honest.
I'm worried that he might come out and say that, at least with the diaconate. And obviously that can't happen. But, one thing that I discuss with a lot of my friends that, are more on the neocon side of things, I'll say, well, where's the line in the sand for you?
Yeah.
Because there's been a lot of lines in the sand for me in the last 10 years. And looking back, we're starting to see more. I mean, we talked about this very early on in this interview about the sacrilege of Pachamama, and was that worse than what the Anglicans just did in the Lateran? And what I think is that a lot of Catholics who are being scandalized, rightly so, by the way, by what's going on in the Vatican under the Francis regime, okay, have to realize that a lot of that, almost all of it, was still going on under Benedict.
Yes.
Under John Paul I and II.
Yes.
Under Paul VI. You could even go back even farther. I mean, we talk about how it didn't just start at Vatican II, okay? So it's just like, as horrible as Pachamama was, don't forget Assisi.
Yeah.
Assisi I and II, okay? Don't forget, and people, please read. It's an excellent biography. And again, it's not an excellent biography because of the content, but Peter Seewald's 2-volume book on Benedict, they basically come out and say Ratzinger was the father of the Second Vatican Council.
Yep.
That it was basically pushing forward his ideas. And yes, Ratzinger probably realized shortly after the council, oops, we went a little too far, and he tried to put the brakes on things. But remember, he still allowed all of these things to happen. And again, I'm not trying to be hypercritical. What I'm trying to do is to give people's perspective to say, all right, you're seeing how bad things are right now under Francis. Now let's start taking a look at the roots, okay? This had been building for a while, okay? And just because now it's out in the open, you shouldn't be surprised. And this is coming from somebody who grew up passionately devoted to John Paul II.
Yep.
Because we were told to be. I mean, he was a rock star, okay? And he knew how to play that part. I mean, he would have done very well at Stratford-on-Avon, either in England or in Ontario.
He would have.
I mean, he was, and again, I'm not necessarily saying that he was an actor in the sense that he didn't believe what he was doing. The problem is I think both Benedict and John Paul were so invested and devoted to Nouvelle Théologie that even when they started to see the problems of it, they still couldn't separate themselves from it.
There is a big red pill, and I don't mean to be hypercritical of Benedict. He just died. I get it. He was very conservative compared to what we have now, but there is a big red pill people need to be willing to take about his theological positions,
And one of the evidences of that is in Summorum Pontificum, the letter attached to it itself. And there's always that line that, and I wrote an article for Crisis, I don't know, 3-4 weeks ago, where, and I just found this. I mean, I've never seen this line because no one ever actually, very few people ever actually read the whole thing of anything, and that's the case also with traditionalists, of course. Almost none of them have ever actually read the entire letter of Summorum Pontificum and the attached letter, the motu proprio and the attached letter. And then it was either the letter
attached
or
letter, which was longer. Yes.
Yes, and I'm researching for this book that I just published, and I'm doing the heavy legwork, and I actually read it, and I get to a line, and it's that paragraph where he says, that the old mass was never abrogated, and what previous generations held sacred we cannot say is not sacred. I'm paraphrasing, but then he goes on to say, and no one ever quotes this. Like I was watching this talk from Dr. Kwasniewski, and I love Kwasniewski, but he was doing this talk, and it was good talk. He was trying to use, and I get why he does this. He's trying to use Ratzinger to show the traditional position because for the conservative Catholic, Ratzinger is the greatest theologian of all time. I had a friend who's an Opus Dei guy, and he goes, Ratzinger is like Mozart. And I'm like, well, okay, yeah, he's very good, but maybe not Mozart. But anyway, but that I get that. He's using Ratzinger because that someone's going to hear Ratzinger and go, okay, I got to listen to this. But then just a couple sentences later, Benedict says something completely shocking. And he says, I'm paraphrasing, but he didn't say SSPX. He just said traditional communities. He said priests in traditional communities. Didn't even say the community as such. And he said if they refuse, they only enjoy full communion if they don't reject saying the new Mass out of principle. So in the mind of Pope Benedict, this very Hegelian German philosophy, which is the air that was breathed at that time. If you reject saying the Novus Ordo out of principle, you actually aren't in full communion with the Church. Now, this is absurd. I mean, you follow this through. Does this mean that, most of the priests in the Fraternity of St. Peter don't say the new Mass out of principle. They might not say that publicly because it's going to get them in trouble, but they don't. Christ the King is, we know that with the priests in Chicago and Institute of Christ the King, otherwise they'd be saying it once a month. And then the opposite must be true. What about all the priests who won't say the traditional Mass, or the bishops that won't? Are they not in full communion? These ideas are absurd. When you fall, there is such thing historically, if I'm being fair, you will find some spiritual writers, some theologians talking about this idea of full communion versus not, but it's mainly a spiritual thing. It's sort of like, a degree of perfection that you have in unity with the Church that is a personal thing. But this idea of it being like a canonical status, this idea of it being a juridical status, of a status of membership in the Church, and it's based on which liturgy you say, this is crazy. This, honestly, if you follow that through, no one's in full communion with Rome. Nobody is, and everybody is, because it doesn't mean anything if nobody is.
We've talked about this before. What does this mean, full communion? I thought being in communion was like being pregnant. You're either in communion or you're not in communion. What is this partial, full? But two things. First one on Mozart. Anytime somebody from Opus Dei or the neocon side says to you, Pope Benedict's like Mozart, your simple response, and I got this from David L. Gray, your simple response is, well, I hope Pope Benedict wasn't a Freemason. Because Mozart was a die-in-the-wool
That's right.
Freemason. Okay.
Yeah.
The second thing that we have to keep remembering, I loved your interview with Father Maudsley.
He's amazing, isn't he?
He basically ruined it for the rest of us priests. We cannot stand up. You rightly said it was the best interview you ever had, and I listened to it. He's right, and I've met Father Maudsley several times, and it's always a delight to be with him. I'm afraid I'm going to get secondhand cancer from him, but
he likes to smoke.
He is a great priest. But something that we have to keep in mind, all right, if we're going to just simply say, well, you're part of this group or you're part of that group, and so I'm not going to have anything to do with you, we're eventually going to lose. So, I'm going to say this, and I'm not saying this to stir the hornet's nest. Institute of Christ the King priests almost always can celebrate the Chrism Mass, okay? I don't necessarily want to judge them and say, well, they must all be modernists because they do that.
Yeah.
Most of the fraternity priests now, at least in the United States, do the pre-55 Easter week, while the Society of Pius X still does just the 62.
Yeah.
Now, why am I pointing all these things out? Okay, because there can still be little differences. Okay,
Yep.
that doesn't mean we nuke the bridge
Yep.
between all of this, and we need to stop doing that. And I mean that on all sides. And where fairness is due, I understand at the beginning there was a lot of sore feelings between the society and the fraternity. And maybe for some of the older ones there still is. Okay, but I can tell you right now, I know a fraternity priest who is a fraternity priest simply because he was judged too old to enter the society. Okay, but he wanted to be a traditional priest. He thought that's what they were being called to. And for anyone to question the so-called Ecclesia Dei communities and whether or not their seminaries give proper Catholic seminary training, look at Father Maudsley.
He's unbelievable. Yeah, he's unbelievable. You know what? And I'm going to bring up quickly here before, I know you got a dog. I can hear your puppy there needs to go to the bathroom maybe. And I just wanted to share the actual quote because this is so amazing. Because I butchered it. And here it is from Benedict. So just, people, just be okay. Take the red pill slowly. No one's saying you got to choke them all down at once. No one's saying he's an anti-pope or a heretic or something. But you got to be able to, Chris Ferrara talks about the time of Benedict being the Benedictine respite. Things were really going to hell in a handbasket. Benedict comes in and he put the brakes on some things. Whether or not you think Summorum Pontificum was strong enough, that's not the point. The point is that traditional Latin Mass grew like crazy because he gave it freedom to at least grow at all, right?
Especially in the United States. I don't know about Canada, but it quadrupled.
Oh, it grew here.
Yeah.
It grew here. We don't. It's probably 10 times as many masses, and Canada's the cities are very spread out, so there's lots of little towns without it. But nonetheless, every big city, you're going to find a few traditional Latin masses, which you would not have had without him. But here is a quote, and he wrote, and right here, needless to say, in order to experience full communion, the priests of the communities adhering to the former usage cannot, as a matter of principle, exclude celebrating according to the new books. So that's just, that's evidence that there's a deep problem going on, even in the smartest minds in the church. And we can all be susceptible to it. This is not me just saying, hey, look at me, I'm smarter than Benedict. I'm just saying, this is what we're dealing with. Okay, last thing, Father. Tell us how to fix the problem. You got 30 seconds.
Always approach everything with love.
Yeah.
That is first and foremost. Our conference this year, the theme is a house united.
Right.
And we've heard others talk about unite or die, unite the clans and everything. And that's all great, but we got to mean it. And we have to stand up for our canceled priests. We have to stand side by side now, lock arms, and realize that we have to defend tradition. Okay, everything has changed since Traditionis Custodes. Everything has changed since the McCarrick scandal, at least in this country, in the United States. Everything has changed since the COVID lockdowns. You know how many people came to tradition?
Yes.
We talk about Summorum Pontificum, but it's because of the COVID lockdowns, and it wasn't just society priests; it was fraternity priests, institute priests, diocesan priests who love tradition. That the parking lot priest up in the Twin Cities. I'm blanking on his name right now, but Father, I will remember it as soon as the show's over.
As soon as we're off, yeah.
Is that they were out there doing masses, sometimes clandestinely, in order for the people to get the sacraments. And we can have a healthy debate on this, that, or the other, over scotch preferably. But what we have to realize is there is really, and I don't mean this to sound cliche, there's a lot more that's uniting us than that's dividing us. All right. Yep. And we have to be united. So, it has to start there, because right now the left very easily puts aside their little differences and has a united front. I've been saying this a lot. I'm going to say it a lot more. We have to start doing the same. And, if we keep attacking each other, it's not going to be a good thing. And I'm not just talking about trads on trads. I'm talking about trads, neocons, and stuff like that. So, jokingly say to your Opus Dei friends, well, I hope Benedict wasn't a Freemason, but I hope that opens the conversation. I hope humor allows the conversation to go a little bit deeper, to say, well, Mozart might not be everything you think he is. Same with Benedict. if we're starting to have those conversations, all the better.
So what you're saying is, just like Justin Trudeau says, diversity is our strength.
No, I don't think it's diverse.
I'm just kidding. I know what you mean.
I know what you're saying. I get the humor behind it, and you're one of the funniest Canadians I know. But
considering you know 3 or 4, that's not bad.
Yeah. I mean, compared to John Henry Weston, you'd be in Vegas right now. But but that side, it's not so much the diversity; it's about realizing that we actually have a lot more in common.
No, you're right.
Than what we think.
No, you're right, and people have to put their big boy pants on or their big girl skirts. I just started a debate about trads wearing skirts or pants. But they got to listen. I have friends who don't go to the society. They're not anti anything I do. They're just not traditionalist, but they believe the dogmas of the church and they go to the Novus Ordo and they think they're going to fight it out in their parish. I think it's not going to work.
I agree with you.
But I don't care in the sense of they're just like I'm happy. They're happy. I'm happy at my mass. I'm happy. They're happy. They pray the rosary. I pray the rosary. We go to confession. We die in a state of grace. We both win. Yeah. And that's all there is. Obviously, you have to, like Father Altman said in that major sermon that went viral a couple years ago, you can't love somebody you don't know. So, we've got to love each other as true brothers and sisters in Christ, as much as that has been co-opted to mean anything and everything for ecumenism, but in the real sense. So everyone, check out the link in the description for the conference this summer. I will be there. A couple of Canadians will be there. They're bringing in some reinforcements. And I'll try not to get arrested with my speech, but at least if I have an escape plan, I can get back outside of the jurisdiction, back to the Canadian border, and I'll be okay.
Listen, everyone, we talked about this earlier, Midsummer's Night stream. We're having the conference Midsummer's Night. So come join us for the Feast of St. John the Baptist.
That's right.
June 23rd and 24th. Maybe we could have some bonfires and burn some witches and heretics.
And he is the patron saint of Quebec. And to this day, you can find sermons and op-eds from Fr Lovell in Montreal newspapers in the archives when he was visiting as Superior of the Holy Ghost Fathers. So that's going to be a good event. All right, Father, can you please lead us in a prayer to end the show?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Benedictio Dei omnipotentis Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti, descende super vos, mani et semper. Amen.
Thank you, Father, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.
God bless.